Elliotte Friedman. He's not just the hardest working man among all insiders in the NHL, but you can tell he's the hardest working because of the quaff. He doesn't have time to be worried about that. He's worried about getting you the latest information. For instance, Edmonton-Montreal, from what we understand, may not happen. What do you
We're waiting for the official announcement, Tony, but it's looking like, as Ryan Rashad reports there, as you have on the screen, Edmonton-Montreal is going to be postponed. There were two Canadian players, Yoel Armia and Kasperi Kotkaniemi, who just showed up on the COVID list this afternoon, the COVID unavailable list. And you have to be careful with that, because just because you're on the list doesn't mean that you have a positive test. It could also mean an exposure. But it sounded like the league was concerned about some more potential options there that could happen. And I think we're going to get this one not played tonight. And then we'll see where we go, because they're supposed to play 3 games over the next few days, and we'll see what can happen here.
As we always hear, the commissioner says the first thing always is about player safety. What's the latest with Nashville? Mattias Ekholm is the name everybody's throwing around. Is he the only defenseman in Nashville that teams are interested in trading for?
No, he's not. And I think what this could come down to, well, Nashville came back from a long and pretty successful road trip. They played really well. On Sunday night, they beat Dallas in a shootout. And they were going to kind of sit back, take stock of where everything was, and begin to make their decisions. And Ekholm's name has been out there a lot. Everybody knows, A, what a good player he is, and B, what a good contract he's got to move. Well, there's another player on Nashville that teams were asking about, and that's Ryan Ellis. And Ellis is injured right now. John Hines just announced yesterday that he'd had surgery. But, Ellis is signed. And I think the issue here with Ekholm is that you got to trade a lot to get him, because he's a good player. It might force some expansion draft issues, and then you have to sign him in another year. Ellis, also a really good player, he's signed for 6 more years. And so if you have to do all of that, you at least know if you acquire him, he's going to be yours for a while. And I think what's kind of happening here is that Nashville's kind of in a position where they might have to say, okay, which path are we going to go down? And they'll make that decision. There's not a lot of long-term deals that are going to be traded right now, but Ellis might be one, because it shows the respect level that he has around the league. He's a right-hand shot defenseman. Those are hard to find, and he is signed for a while.
Respected around the league and around the world, going back to his World Junior days. My goodness, what a player. Now, I don't have 5 cup rings like the guys that are standing next to me, but I can look at the final score of Flyers games and know that they are needing blue line help. What's the latest on that topic with the trade deadline looming?
Well, I think that one of the biggest things that the Flyers are looking at is, are we really going for it this year? Are we going to go out and get a player that we need to give up a lot for this season? And I do think that's been a factor with Ekholm. All of a sudden they're looking at the way they're playing this year and saying, are we really going to win it this season? Should we be going out and spending our great capital, and they have a lot of picks and prospects and good young players, for something for this year? Does it really make sense? And, I don't have any evidence of this, but it wouldn't surprise me if Philly was one of the teams talking about Ellis instead of Ekholm, because it's longer term and they can sort themselves out. I do think one player Philly's had some interest in potentially is Mark Stahl. But if Nashville's thinking about Ellis, it wouldn't surprise me if Philly's one of those teams, because it's not necessarily a 1.5-year thing. It's a long-term thing. And that would make sense more for the Flyers. I think they're starting to look at big picture beyond this season, not just this year. And it's probably the smart thing to do with the way it's been going lately.
Sounds like the smart thing to do. There have been a lot of smart moves ever since Lou Lamoriello got to the island. Barry Trotz, hiring him turned out to be a stroke of genius. In what has been an era of good feelings, ever since those two guys got there, there was a really bad feeling when Anders Lee went down and it was a season-ending knee injury. That leaves a gaping hole in their top 6. How do they address that?
Well, I think they're going to look around at some players out there. I mean, you've heard a lot of names, Taylor Hall, you've heard Kyle Palmieri. I think all of those names have kind of been thrown around out there, and it makes sense. Like, those players are rentals and they're good players. One thing I've been trying to do, Tony, is do my Lou Lamoriello stealth thought. as Ken Danico sitting next to you knows, that Lou Lamoriello is going to try to do something that no one's going to think of because that's the way he is.
True.
And so I was going through all the rosters and trying to figure out a guy that he might be interested in who nobody's going to figure out. And one name I thought of, and I admit this is just me, I don't have any knowledge that they're talking about him, but I said the guy makes sense, is Dustin Brown. Now, he's had a real resurgence this year for the Kings. He's got 14 goals in 28 games. Lee's a left shot and Brown's a right shot, but he's a net front guy. He's had a great year on the power play. I don't know if the Kings would even do this. For one, they're in the race. They want their young players playing big games. And I think it would be a major decision for them to ever move a guy who's been that big in the history of that organization. But it's the kind of guy I thought that Lou Lamoriello would target because A, he kind of fits what Lee does, B, he's had playoff success, and C, no one's thought of it. And I think all of those things kind of appeal to him.
You know what you're talking about when it comes to the National Hockey League. You had Dano giggling throughout that entire answer. What's the latest with the Montreal Canadiens? What would it take for them to include Cole Caulfield in a trade?
Well, I think that's such a huge thing. I believe the Canadiens were preparing. It's an unusual year this year with the way that it ends between the Frozen Four and the season, that they could potentially add him and have him for the playoffs. I do think that's something that they were thinking about the possibility of doing. I think it would take something enormous for that to happen, just massive. When Mark Bergevin says he's not really interested in anything, I don't really believe it because he's bold, and I don't think a lot of other people in the league believe it either. But I would love to see the deal that would actually get them to consider this. I think it would have to be absolutely massive.
The numbers are why that smile exists. You saw that he's leading the whole country in scoring with 49 points, and that headshot tells you Cole understands how good he is at the game of hockey. The Leafs understand how good Jonathan Quick was for the Kings when they won their 2 cups in 3 years. Jonathan Quick in 2021, an appealing prospect to trade for or not for the Leafs from your vantage point?
I don't see Jonathan Quick and the Maple Leafs making a lot of sense. Now, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence here that is smart. He's a very competitive guy. I think the Maple Leafs like that. He's got a relationship with Jack Campbell, who right now is the #1 guy in the Toronto net. I think they could work together. But, I think when you really look at it, Quick's 36. His body's been through an awful lot. Do you really think it makes sense for Toronto to put him through a 2-week quarantine, then take another week to get him going, and then put him into big games? I don't think they think that's smart. Now, I do think the Maple Leafs have investigated the possibility of adding another goaltender, but I think they're looking at it like this. It has to be someone who's an absolute clear-cut upgrade over Frederik Andersen. That's number one. And number two, if you're going across the border, it has to be somebody who absolutely you think you can put through that and still will be effective. I don't believe that's the best way to deal with Quick. I don't think he'll be the guy. I think they've looked at Arizona's guys, but again, Antti Ranta also has an injury history. So I don't know that I think this is going to happen, although I do think Toronto's investigated the possibility of it. Quick's injury history plus the quarantine, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to them.
I do know this, in the Toronto market, having a starting goalie, a #1 with a save percentage under 900 doesn't go down smoothly. Connor Garland is my favorite Coyote. He will probably always be my favorite Coyote because the stick is optional. He will score goals with his face if necessary. Yet, I understand that there could be a potential deal for him looming. Could he be on his way out of the desert?
They are considering it, I think, and the reason is that there's interest, number one. Number two, he's got one of the best contracts in the league this year at $775, but he's arbitration eligible, and then arbitration eligible a second time, and he's an unrestricted free agent. He's been a point-a-game player. He plays hard. He's become a target now for other teams because he plays so hard. I just think that Arizona's looking at it like we have to restock the cupboard. And this is a player that can do it for them. I wouldn't be. He's from Massachusetts. I wouldn't be surprised if Boston was among the teams that's interested. Boston's looking for scoring, and I think what's going to come down to, does Arizona get a big offer here? I think if they do, and I think it's possible they do, I think they will look into it for sure.
It's so simple. He plays so hard. It's so admirable. Elliotte, thanks so much. Great information as always.
You know, Tony, I wanted to give a shout out to my buddy in Vegas, Gary Lawless. He saw me during this and he texted me, "Are you okay?" I just want to say, Gary and everybody else, my captors are treating me well. I'm perfectly fine.
You're the best. You're the absolute best.